There you go. We are on Zoom. First of all, let me welcome everybody. My name is Sabina Leonelli. I'm the director of the Exeter Center for the Study of the Life Sciences at the University of Exeter. And I'm delighted to be hosting this book launch, which is appropriately virtual, for a volume that I've edited together with Hugh Williamson, who will be talking shortly after me, on responsible plant data linkage, data challenges for agricultural research and development. So I want to really thank everybody here for their work on this volume. Of course, Springer for supporting the open access publication of the volume, and particularly the Alan Turing Institute, the European Research Council, and the University of Exeter and the Library of the University of Exeter for supporting this effort and allowing us to produce this volume in this way. I should say, indeed, remind everybody that we are recording this event so that we can then post it on the YouTube channel for the Egenis Center, since quite a few people have manifested an interest in seeing the event, but cannot be here today with us at this moment in time. So just be mindful of that when intervening in the discussion. So what to do today is introduce the volume, say something about its history and how it's come together, and then give the word to some of the wonderful co-authors and collaborators and participants who have participated in writing chapters and basically making this book a reality. So first of all, this book, which is fully available online. You can download it right now. If you don't have it already, you can download individual chapters or the whole book. Comes from a research project which I initiated now almost 4 years ago at the Alan Turing Institute in London, which was titled From Field Data to Global Indicators. And this project was meant to, as in the caption here, as you can see on the website of the project, to investigate how plant data can be efficiently and reliably linked across data infrastructures around the world. The inspiration for the project was several collaborations which had been ongoing with various plant data platforms, both looking at more fundamental science and more crop science and agricultural science, which I carried out over the years from the point of view of studying their functioning from a perspective of philosophy, history, and social studies of science, and really being interested in how the setup of these structures was changing and continues to change the way in which we produce knowledge and we intervene in the environment around us, and try and think about how a project could help to map this space, help to coordinate some of these initiatives, and bring also some qualitative awareness of some of the challenges and the problems and the opportunities that appear to researchers on a daily basis working on this project to the mind of the people that are actually responsible for setting up infrastructures from a technical perspectives, setting up semantic systems that allow us to, in fact, exchange data and to link different platforms, and also think about the regulation and the governance of that data and related types of knowledges, both at a national and an international level. This actually turned out to be a much more complex project that I expected and many of the collaborators expected. Very, very difficult thing to do. And so one of the things that we decided to do, particularly also given the fact that most of the project was carried out under pandemic times, so we're kind of all stuck at home, trying to think about how we could collaborate on a project like this, was to put together a rather formidable group of authors coming from very different organizations, all very involved and central to thinking about how we connect crop data around the world in ways that really can inform our fight for the survival of the planet. And put together a volume that would help us to think about not just how to do this data linkage effectively, but also how to situate that in a much broader socio-political environment, and how to do this responsibly, also given the very different types of stakeholders and participants in this type of environment. So the project was based at the Center for the Study of the Life Sciences, as I said, at the University of Exeter, which has now existed for about 20 years and is devoted to forging collaborations between people who are working in the history, the social studies, and the philosophy of science, and particularly the life sciences, and researchers who are carrying out that work on the ground on an everyday basis in natural science. Also, we were very happy to be able to collaborate with the Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence at the University of Exeter, which has provided us with lots of support throughout the project, and is also co-sponsored the book launch and many other activities within the project. And we are extremely grateful to both of these institutions for the support they gave to the book. I think if I want to give a premise to what this book is all about, it does, I think, constitute a very interesting instance of what collaboration between data scientists, data curators, plant and crop scientists, regulatory bodies and funders, and people who are working on data studies and studies of biology from the perspectives of history, philosophy, and social studies of biology can actually yield when you bring these perspectives together and you get people to reason with each other and work in a way that's really transdisciplinary. So obviously, this book is just one step in this direction. There's a lot of work to do to make sure that these conversations keep happening. And I'm hoping that this book will be one of many stepping stones towards ensuring that we have regular venues where we can have these kinds of exchanges, both at the local level and at the international level. The emphasis within the book, within each chapter, and of course in the introduction we provided, is on trying to intertwine considerations that pertain to the technical and scientific aspects of data linkage with considerations that are typically regarded to pertain to the ethical and societal concerns underpinning data linkage. Why is this important? Because as we're advocating in the book, it's really impossible, in fact, to disentangle these two aspects. Whenever thinking about what may constitute ways of producing reliable knowledge in the longer term and producing, in fact, sustainable data infrastructures, one also has to confront very pressing issues around how these infrastructures are maintained, who is going to support them, what kind of socioeconomic system and political systems may, in fact, support these collaborations, and also, perhaps most importantly, how do these platforms represent and involve many different types of knowledges about plants and crops, which are now turning out to be absolutely crucial to how we understand the environment, and will involve not just formal and professional parts of science, but also indigenous knowledge, also local knowledge coming from very different kinds of parts of the world, and people who are not usually recognized to be professional scientists, such as, for instance, farmers and breeders. The key question within the volume is how do we achieve intelligent and responsible openness? And the hope is that the volume provides absolutely wonderful examples of work that has been done to try and answer this question, and also step forwards that could be taken in future years to follow up on this work. And as I said, a key role in the volume is given to participant data governance. So try and involve many different stakeholders at very different levels of organization in these kinds of efforts. So for today, the agenda is to try and feature many different authors representing different perspectives that we have in the book. And so right after me, I'm going to give the word to Daniele Manzella, who's going to represent a perspective from the Food and Agriculture Organization, contributing to the book and really supporting our activities throughout, for which, again, we're extremely grateful. After me, after Daniele, Hugh Williamson will introduce the structure of the book, and then we're going to have various comments from authors and contributors to the book coming from a variety of different perspectives. And hopefully, if we have time, we're going to then open up for a Q&A with the audience if you have any questions, and then we're going to try and close in time so that we keep it to within the hour. So in the interest of following this agenda and not taking more time that is allocated to me, I'm now going to give the word to Daniele Manzella from the FAO, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabina, and thank you, of course, for having me with you today. For the actual or maybe future listeners who do not know me yet, my name is Daniele Manzella. I work for the Secretariat of the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, also known as the Plant Treaty at FAO. Now, our Plant Treaty is one of the multilateral institutions involved in agricultural data governance. One of the main components of the Plant Treaty is the Global Information System on Plant Genetic Resources. And this Global Information System has the vision of integrating and augmenting existing information systems to create the global entry point to information and knowledge concerning crop germplasm. Essentially to strengthen the capacity to conserve, manage, and utilize such crop germplasm. Now, the main task of this global information system, and this is encast in the program of work that has just been revised by the governing body, is essentially bridging the gap between the institutions serving as sources of crop germplasm and conducting research activities, and essentially the actors using germplasm to develop products. Now, two very, I think, paramount challenges are embedded in general in the work of the Plant Treaty, and in particular in the implementation work of the Global Information System. First, as a multilateral process, the Plant Treaty is called to include the variety of perspectives and views over agricultural development, and again, the variety of views over how plant research can contribute to achieving macro objectives such as food security, sustainable agriculture, and multiple sustainable development goals. So essentially, heterogeneity is a fundamental characteristic that shapes our implementation work. The second challenge, our work is also largely determined by a central governance challenge, and this is echoed in several chapters of the book, which is the perceived inequity that characterizes agricultural research across different geographies. Essentially, many agricultural stakeholders of the developing world still nowadays operate essentially as providers of biological materials and, of course, the related data, and they do not play an active role in actually using the data to generate or contribute to generating agricultural innovation. So essentially, at the Secretariat of the Plant Treaty, but in general within the Plant Treaty community, we strive to address these two challenges. And I think this book, the knowledge that is embedded in this book, I think sends us two strong messages that I think relate to these challenges. First one, data are not just to be accessible, but usable too. And essentially, again, this book is very clear in affirming that solid data systems can be built not only by solving technical issues, but essentially intertwining technical, legal, and ethical dimensions as well. Essentially, making plant data usable or reusable is more than a technical challenge. And again, in my opinion, this book makes a decisive practical contribution towards the understanding of how to harmonize multiple conceptual and social challenges that, again, are inseparable from the technical aspects. The second strong message contained in this book relates to interdisciplinarity. Plant-related work is not just a domain of professional research. It involves many contributors. If I look at the experience of the Plant Treaty, I can certainly point out to farmers, and the related communities, breeders. Now we have a new strategy to engage the food industry. Food producers as well contribute to plant reader work, and obviously policymakers at all levels, international, regional, and national. And we intimately share, I personally intimately share, and our team at the Plant Treaty Secretariat concur on this, we share the vision of the book according to which all these actors are to be brought together under a common goal. That essentially is the goal of facilitating data exchanges that are not only scientifically valuable, but also responsive, mindful, aware of the social contexts in which biological materials and data are collected and used. Again, and I'll close here, in many of the intellectual contributions grouped in this book, I detected the same commitment that we have, that is to create knowledge and mechanisms for building in a collaborative fashion governance and technical systems that are conducive to the mainstreaming of legal, ethical, and social considerations into the indispensable technical solutions for linking plant data globally. Again, thank you for this opportunity. I'll stop here and I'll pass the floor to you, if I understand well. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Daniele, for this introduction. And indeed, the floor is to you, Hugh.
Great, thank you. I will share screen to get the slides back up. Can you see that okay? Oh, good, great. So I'll give a brief overview of the volume. I'll keep this fairly quick because we have quite a few of the contributors here who can tell you in more detail about the content of their chapters, but just to give you a sense of how we've organized it. We divided the volume into 4 parts to reflect 4 key areas of challenges for responsible practice around data linkage. We saw them. In some ways, this is arbitrary because, as Sabina and Daniele have indicated, there is a whole lot of cross-disciplinary work that necessarily goes on in these areas, and it's hard to bound specific practices off as one area or the other. But as a working principle, we found this quite a useful way of moving forward. And the areas of challenge that we identified were firstly the field, so field sites in the broad sense where plants are grown and data are collected, then the data themselves, and then management in various infrastructures with standards, with various forms of sharing. From there's the institutions who are responsible for governing and managing various kinds of data that enter their remit. And then also the communities who are involved both in the cultivation of plants and are the recipients of the technologies that arise from various sorts of research and development work. On the farming side, other stakeholders in the food system, and also the research communities who can be just as diverse as some of the wider communities that this work sits in. And one of the objectives that Sabina and I really hope to achieve with the volume, and that we reflect on in our concluding chapter, is to foster a sort of a vision of responsible practice as inextricably linked to supporting development of multiple different forms of agricultural research and development. So the use of data to support diverse solutions for diverse agricultural environments globally, rather than one-size-fits-all strategies. And I think the chapters in the book provide an insight into some of the possibilities that are available, not an exhaustive list, it would be hard to cover that, but one that reflects some of the real cutting edge thinking in this domain. So we're very grateful for everyone who's contributed their thoughts and their expertise. So to briefly introduce some of the contents, we start off with an introduction that provides an overview of the challenges and lays out several key steps that we consider necessary to achieve responsible data linkage. And this draws on some of the lessons from the other chapters, but also goes beyond this a bit. And then the first part turns to the challenges posed in field sites, really, how data are collected and managed in sites with different resources, in different political situations, and the implications these have. And we start off with Greg Radick, who we'll hear from via a pre-recorded video in a little bit, who opens with a philosophical perspective on how data are always born theory-laden and then draws several parables from this situation. Then that shifts to Richard Harrison and Mario Kakamo from NIAB, who give a really quite dizzying overview of the possibilities for data linkage afforded by modern plant breeding and national seed regulation services and research. Then from there, we shift to Palestine, where Courtney Fullilove and Abdallah Alimari reflect on how Palestinian farmers' own characterizations of their crop varieties, which are very rich with local meaning, defy reduction to standard methods of archiving seeds in international agricultural research. And then finally, we hear from Afolabi Agboner and his colleagues from the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria, who we will also hear from via a pre-recorded video in a little bit about their cassava breeding practices, but I won't give that away in advance. And then from there, the second part, we shift to thinking about the management of data within wider infrastructures, focusing on sharing. And these are very concerned with how do you make data fair? How do you manage it so that other people can effectively reuse it? And we have contributions from several quite different areas. We have, firstly, from Chris Rawlings and Rob Davey, who've been involved in the Designing Future Week programme in the UK, which is a large-scale collaboration, talking through their processes as part of the data management team to make sure that data is created fair and carries on fair. Then we also have Richard Osler, who we'll hear from later, who can explain a little bit more about the Rothamsted long-term agricultural experiments, and then also a perspective from the Elixir plant sciences community in Europe, who've been involved with developing various standards. Then for the third part, we shift to the questions of institutions and their responsibilities and governance strategies. And again, we have a range of contributions here, starting with historian Helen Curry, who talks about some of the dilemmas of rationalizing gene banks and the tensions between economic incentives and political aims of collaborating in Europe, and how the data infrastructures that they used affected and created frictions there. And then at a much wider scale, we have a contribution from Daniele and his colleagues who are addressing some of the political and legal questions that have arisen in relation to the access and benefit sharing mechanisms and the related issues of technical definition of the particular kinds of data that may or may not enter the legal remit there. Then that continues with Medha Devare and colleagues from the CGIAR and also from Bayer Crop Science, talking about their experience governing agricultural data in very large institutions. And then Nalini, who we'll also hear from, talking about they provide a detailed proposal about how blockchain technologies could be implemented to develop digital marketplaces for diverse plant genetic materials that benefit smaller farmers, rather than just being oriented towards larger players. And then finally, we come to a focus on how do you engage with the different communities involved with this. And here we have a contribution from GODAN, the Global Open Data for Agriculture and Nutrition, who've been involved in developing codes of conduct for the protection of farmer data privacy, from Fotini Zampati. And then we have Salim Louafi and his colleagues talking about their experiences bringing farming stakeholders into the actual design of collaborative research projects on plant biodiversity. That follows another focus on communities of practice, as Salim and his collaborators have done, but this time among research communities in the Research Data Alliance's interest group on agricultural data. And then Sabina and I conclude by also dealing with some of the issues produced by engaging communities through methods of product profiling in plant breeding, which is something dealt with Afolabi Agboner in his earlier chapter, but we think about some of the tensions and issues that come from accessing the data needed there, and then ultimately the implications of this for how strategies are developed to engage with communities. And so in order to keep to time, I will bring it to a close there and hand over to some of our excellent contributors who will be able to tell you a bit more detail about their thoughts on the topic and also their contributions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the overview, Hugh. And now we give the word to Brian King, who is representing the CGIAR and the used to be called Big Data Platform and now One CGIAR platform. And yeah, if you could tell us something from your perspective about your chapter, it would be great. Thanks, Brian.
Sure. Yeah. So the book chapter that we collaborated in on pulling together addresses data interoperability at the intersection of policy. And you know, as Daniele referred to, the policy trajectory regarding access and benefit sharing related to genetic resources under the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Plant Treaty will unfold essentially sort of as it must. You know, it's a multi-stakeholder driven process, gets very complex, it can get very contentious. And what we aim to do is, well, what we propose is a technical method for at least equipping, you know, our community with some of the tools we know our community will need for actually achieving some level of precision of definition and data interoperability. And so our goal with this is not, our goal nor our mandate, you know, is not to, you know, resolve the sort of knotty questions around access and benefit sharing, but to equip our community with some of the tools we think it will need. And so just by way of example, so in one of the Conference of Party meetings, it was sort of agreed that there is not yet an agreement on how do we define digital sequence information, what comprises it, what is in and what is out, why, and you know, all of these are issues that were open for discussion. And a bit of the kind of framing technical work that went into that discussion noted that there's a vast diversity of view of what should be included, sort of what should be in or out of DSI. And so everything from, you know, pretty narrowly defined of just, you know, genome maps, DNA, RNA, to that plus metabolites, that plus additional information, all the way through to being able to link to traditional knowledge or note ag-ecological interactions of that material. And there are any number of very good reasons why you would want to be able to link, you know, those definitional, you know, sort of areas to a common way of working. And so essentially what we propose is to create a sort of type of knowledge object where you can have a way that you are annotating essentially data that are agreed to be genetic data. We sort of draw the bounds a bit closer to the DNA, RNA, you know, kind of side of the spectrum. However, we propose a way in which you could use data annotation drawing from community-driven ontologies around how you describe those data. And so, and we sort of chart a course, pretty complex looking one, so it has to be piloted and tested and learned around, about how you would start to be using data that has both enough precision of definition, so we know what it is, because all of that, you know, definitional work still going on at the level of the treaty, and also how do you link that to other data across domains. And so, yeah, it's been a really great collaboration where we've got, you know, the kind of deeper information science folks and the policy folks working together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Brian. And now going straight to Elisabeth Arnaud from Montpellier, and also working with the CGIAR, who provides a perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Sabina. I will be a bit more technical, and in fact, I would like to share my screen. I hope you can see it. I prepared just a few slides. So my talk will be about a bit more technical, but I contributed to 2 papers of this very useful book. One is the one just Brian presented, because as he mentioned, ontology is a key element for defining the data object you want to link. And also I contributed to the governance of data in agriculture, because the governance is very important. So I just focused my talk to the crop ontology, because this is the eldest ontology developed by CGIAR. And then I wanted to show you just what we did to improve the trust into that tool as a semantic resource for linking plant data. So just a brief about CGIAR for those who don't know what it is. So it's a network of 15 research centers spread in several countries worldwide, 89, which are mainly producing countries of tropical and subtropical crops. And the network encompasses more than 3,000 partners. So you can imagine that with the 50 years of experience, CGIAR has generated a lot of data sets that really needs to be made open and linked to make sense, because the research of CGIAR is addressing, of course, food security in a climate change context. So the CGIAR is having two major initiatives, aside a lot of others, of course, the Breeding Resource Initiative and the Accelerating Breeding Initiative. So in both, they are trying to find the more suitable traits of crops adapted to the new environment that is shaped by the climate change, and replace varieties that are already too old to cope with those changes. So the crop ontology is a tool that was created in 2009 under the launch of the Generation Change program. So the need was to describe properly what is a trait, what is a crop trait, because it's a key element in the data and key element of breeding, of course. So we have developed that tool to enable to publish online a reference list of traits properly defined with the format that we have been promoting. And also we have helped defining what is a variable, what you measure in the field, and what is a trait exactly, what is the phenotype of your crop. And this has helped, of course, the CGIAR to modernize the breeding by introducing digital field books and databases that were helping breeders to define their breeding program. So this was a key element for linking data, but from the field to the database and the analytical tools. Today we have 34 crops there. Latest is apple and sainfoin, which is a forage, and more than 5,000 traits. And what makes the ontology, the crop ontology, a reference is because it's linked to major information system that is widely spread, like the breeding management system and BreedBase. They are disseminated in breeding programs of national institutions. And also we are recommended by major standards like BRAPI, MAIAPI for phenotyping experiments. And we are indexed by large ontology registries like the Ontology Lookup Service or AgroPortal. So this is an important aspect of making more our tool more usable and used. We launched a survey in November about the use of this ontology, and because of the spread of that breeding database to the producing country, the majority of our users who have responded, at least, are located in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is and secondly in Europe. So to bring more trust into that tool as a resource, we decided to develop a governance framework. It was discussed through consultations in 2019 with all the stakeholders of that ontology, and we published the framework in early 2022. And from that framework, we have created 3 advisory committees. One which represent the creators, meaning the data scientists who are really managing the list of traits, their definition and their development. A strategy committee that is composed of our main partners, third-party systems using the ontology, and a scientific advisory committee with scientists. So this was long due, and it's new, so we are taking shape with this framework, and we offer the discussion tool with a social network, which is online. And out of that framework, we define a very solid workflow that also helps newcomers to the tool to understand what is the role, how they will be attributed or cited, and how the quality of the data published is checked, and how the decisions are made through the advisory group. So this is something we highlight in the governance of agricultural data, is the importance of having good governance framework with the proper tools and good representation of the stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And if you want to stop sharing the screen, then we can go back to the general audience. And thanks so much for this overview, extremely helpful to situate the work that's happening in this volume. And now I'm going to go to Richard Osler from Rothamsted for his comments.
Thank you, Sabina. Yeah, so the chapter that we wrote from Rothamsted was on our long-term experiments, and next year is the 180th anniversary of Broadwalk, which is our longest running and, in fact, the longest running experiment in the world. And the big challenge that we have many challenges with long-term experiment data. The first and the real challenge is that there really isn't currently an established community of practice around how we manage data from these long-term experiments. And the data from these experiments is really quite diverse. It's not just plant data, it's also a lot of soils data and also some agroecology data as well. And what we've really been seeing over the last few years is there is a lot more interest now in using the data from these experiments to address different questions around crop sustainability and agricultural sustainability and climate change adaptation. So one of the real benefits of long-term experiments is they're able to track in the data these decadal processes which really affect things like soil. So if you want to assess how your farm management affects your soil carbon, then you need a long-term experiment to really give you that evidence. And so they really are quite unique resources. So we're starting to see more people asking these kinds of questions from the experiments. We're also seeing more people asking questions around the nutritional quality of crops that have been grown as well. And again, it's having that long-term perspective helps us to answer those questions. But one of the challenges that we have as a long-term experiments community is giving visibility to these platforms and giving the platform owners or the experiment owners the agency to manage that data. So that there are still challenges around data governance and how we address that. And we also have challenges around the language that we use for long-term experiments. So more and more we are starting to see adoption of ontologies like the crop ontology. But when it comes to describing what happens on an experiment, we have real difficulties there. So we can describe the data that we generate from the experiments relatively well now using things like crop ontology. But when it comes to the management of those experiments, it's more difficult. So if we take, for example, something like tillage as a treatment factor, it's quite, if you're looking at something like a breeding experiment, tillage would be a really unusual treatment factor to have in your experiment, but it's quite common in long-term experiments. But if you have terms like no tillage or minimum tillage or conventional tillage or inversion tillage, these are all really quite loaded and they mean different things to different people. So we still don't have a good way of expressing the complexity of information in those terms. So the type of equipment that's being used, the depth that you're tilling to, and if you're wanting to understand processes in the soil and how they in fact affect plant nutrition, this is really key metadata for understanding that data. So yeah, this process for us has been a really useful way of starting to shine a light on some of these challenges to a broader audience. And I think it's quite telling. We have a conference coming up next year at Rothamsted, and one of the key themes on that is going to be data management and the long-term curation of these experiments and the data for them. So people recognize that there is an immense amount of value here, but actually exploiting that value is still a big challenge. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's just great to hear. and hopefully indeed we're going to see this work kind of then taking different forms and new life in lots of different iterations around different institutions and collaborations. So it's now time to turn to 3 contributors who have very kindly sent us videos for their contributions because they couldn't be here right at this time and this afternoon, at least afternoon here in the UK. And the first of them is Nalini Kochupillai, who joins us from the Technische Universität Munich.
Do let me know if there are any issues with the sound once this starts.
Sure.
Warm greetings to everyone from a rather cold day in Munich. My name is Nalini Kochupillai, or Nalini for short. I'm currently a guest professor at the Technical University of Munich, and I'm currently leading the ethics group at the Future Lab, Artificial Intelligence for Earth Observation. It is a project funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research. I'm also affiliated as a researcher at the Institute for Ethics in Artificial Intelligence at the Technical University of Munich. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here with all of you, at least virtually. And it was also a great pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to contribute to this key multidisciplinary reference in the field of plant data and sustainable agriculture, put together by Sabina and Hugh. So needless to say, the book launch is itself very special, where all of the contributors of the book have come together to give a sneak preview of what they have contributed to this momentous volume. So I congratulate Sabina and Hugh at the outset for their hard work and commitment to ensuring that the broadest possible coverage of perspectives has happened in this volume and has brought together insights from across the globe. So as a scientist with a background in intellectual property law and ethics, my own journey in the field of sustainable agriculture began when I was compiling my PhD as a fellow of the Max Planck Institute for Innovation and Competition here in Munich. So I was looking into means of promoting sustainable innovations in plant varieties. And it brought me to a lot of field research in India, where I met highly innovative farmers who were working with indigenous seeds. They were saving and improving these seeds year after year, and thereby maintaining not just seed diversity, but also ancient farming systems that help retain biodiversity within the soil. So interestingly, despite the wealth of knowledge that these farmers were maintaining, their own socioeconomic conditions were often meager, with most farmers getting little to no award recognition or even basic economic benefits for their hard work and their innovation. As a result, farmers were also facing dwindling incentives to continue their priceless work of in situ agrobiodiversity conservation. So after years of researching legal incentive schemes, I came to the conclusion that beyond legal regimes, technologies such as AI and blockchain may be better suited to incentivize in situ conservation, research, and innovation with indigenous seeds and agrobiodiversity. In our chapter, which is titled Creating a Digital Marketplace for Agrobiodiversity and Plant Genetic Sequence Data, Legal and Ethical Considerations of an AI and Blockchain-Based Solution, together with Julia Koeninger, who is a bright young PhD student at the University of Vigo, we have discussed the current market and regulatory failures that prevent the emergence of a robust marketplace for agrobiodiversity and plant genetic sequence data. Our focus is on agrobiodiversity conserved in situ and on the shortcomings of research and innovation systems that focus solely on top-down flows of knowledge. We propose ways in which rapidly evolving technologies like blockchain and machine learning can and should diversify the direction of scientific research, as well as of data and knowledge flows in the agricultural sector. The chapter, we hope, will provide extensive food for thought for developing novel regulatory frameworks and ethical business models for robust digital marketplaces for agrobiodiversity to emerge. And we hope that these markets will benefit farmers, researchers, and the environment. We look forward to receiving your feedback on the chapter and on the volume. And also, we hope to have the opportunity to collaborate with several of you to take this important field of research forward. That's all, and I hope that we can meet soon. Thank you.
Great. So now that we've heard from Nalini, we're going to shift to Afola Gbona, who is talking about his work at the International Institute for Tropical Agriculture in Ibadan, Nigeria.
Hi, my name is Afola Gbona. I'm a data scientist with the Cassava program at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture. A short from ITA in Nigeria. ITA is one of the cities leaders in the world, and its mission is to offer leading research partnership that facilitate agricultural solutions to hunger, poverty, and natural resources degradation throughout sub-Saharan Africa. This is done at ITA through several projects, and one of such projects is the Next Gen Cassava project. Next Gen Cassava projects seek to modernize cassava breeding using cutting-edge tools for efficient delivery of improved cassava to farmers. Our cassava program is characterized by a heterogeneous data set, genomic, phenomic, layers, wet chemistry data sets, sensory panel, and other types of data sets from socioeconomics that help create informed decisions on product and consumer profiling. We have other kinds of data also from digital imagery, from UAVs, radiogram, from GPR. Think about this heterogeneity. As this being done, you can find out in the volume entitled Towards Responsible Plant Data Linkage, where we describe how we manage data in practice using our data management approach, the tools we deploy to improve social inclusion in product profiling, and also the challenges we face in managing this complex data set. And also not forgetting the importance of crop ontology. Overall, the volume provides rich information on what responsible practice is in relation to plant data linkage. Thank you.
Wonderful, and with many thanks to Afola for participating from afar. Last but not least, we go to our colleague in History and Philosophy of Science from the University of Leeds, Greg Ruddick.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Greg Ruddick. I'm a historian and philosopher of science based at the University of Leeds in the UK. And it's my privilege to have been part of the project and indeed to have the chapter that opens the volume whose launch we're celebrating today. I really wish I could be there live to participate, but I'm glad to have this opportunity to pay tribute to the project and also to Sabina and Hugh for pulling it together in such an amiable and such a productive way. About the project, it was something we participated in, we authors, in the pit of the pandemic. And at that point, the academic community was very much feeling its way towards how to organize ourselves in the new online world that we were pitched into willy-nilly. And the workshop that Sabina and Hugh organized, for me, showed just how good this kind of a thing could be. It was interdisciplinary, it was international, but it was also immensely collegial and productive. The way that we would all come together week after week, having read the work in advance, having short presentations and then discussions, I just found it so stimulating that for me, it remains a high watermark of what can be accomplished in the online world. So I just want to congratulate Hugh and Sabina on the tremendous organization of the workshops, right on through to the editing of the contributions to the volume. My own case, I remain amazed that I was able to write this and that it came out, in my view, as close to being what I hoped for as it did. And that's all down to their ability to keep work moving, to keep nudging colleagues, and to do so in such a collegial way. The chapter that I wrote is called Theory-latedness as a problem for plant data linkage. And it aims to suggest that the categories under which data is described and after that cataloged it is important because the categories can embed theoretical presumptions, and that can be a challenge for the dream of ultimate data linkage. My paper comes in two parts. First, there's what I call a pessimistic parable, where I tried to suggest looking at the debate over Mendel's work in the early 20th century, that the category problem is a real problem and something that has to be confronted along with all of the infrastructural problems and the social problems that are addressed so illuminatingly in the volume elsewhere. But I don't want to end on a downbeat, and so the chapter ends with an optimistic parable about how some of those category problems can be addressed so long as the physical material that was investigated initially is still available, the seeds in the first instance, but ideally the seeds in context, the context of soil, climate, and so forth. So it was a real privilege for me to have a chance to work on these topics, which are close to my heart, but I never had a chance to look at them from quite this angle before. And again, a privilege to be part of the community that Sabina and Hugh pulled together around the volume. So many congratulations on the book. I wish it every success. And thanks for inviting these comments.
Okay, so this was Greg Radic with extremely generous comments, and I don't think we really have incredible amounts of time for a proper Q&A, but I would invite anybody who may have particular queries to offer to the volume or particular authors to maybe put it in the chat so I can pick them up and roll them into the conclusion for this book launch. I should say that, as I said, in starting the meeting, hopefully these various interventions were useful in giving a taster of the very different perspectives, the very different concerns that underpin some of the work and some of the gazes that can be given on the question of data linkage and how we're actually collecting data, reusing data, and really constructing knowledge systems to support agricultural policies, agricultural research, and of course interventions. One of the things I guess many people have mentioned that characterizes this volume is this very peculiar set of interdisciplinary interactions. These were by no means easy to put together, and I really have to commend my co-editor Hugh, who has been absolutely stellar in really kind of giving life to this project and pulling us all together and consistently doing the work to actually keep this project going as we went along, especially under extremely difficult conditions, as Greg was saying, in the middle of the pandemic. I think a volume like this is a step towards showing that combining qualitative and quantitative perspectives in studying how we put together technical systems, which however have huge implications in terms of how we govern research and conduct research and what that research is going to do in the worlds that we inhabit, is really important. That there is a space for doing very complex and sophisticated data science, pulling together lots of different results coming from different parts of the world. There is also still space, and is actually very important, for detailed and more qualitative case studies where we can go deep from an historical perspective, but also from a contemporary perspective in what is actually happening on the ground, what are the conditions under which farmers, plant researchers, and policymakers are laboring to actually try and employ these technologies and this knowledge, and try and use that understanding to improve practices and even regulation going forward. And of course, there is expertise that comes from the history of science, the philosophy of science, the social studies of science, to try and support some of these efforts that are, I think, far too often seen to be a purely technical endeavor. Of course, is crucial to do the data science work, the algorithmic work, the infrastructure and software work, to put together tools to bring this kind of knowledge in an integrated way to speak to the questions that we're interested in. But a constant reflection on what the technical decisions actually mean for people on the ground, for the various stakeholders involved, I think is very important. And so what we are hoping with this volume is that going forward, maybe some of the conversations that we started in the chapters will continue in a collaborative form. There will continue to be at the level of regulation and policy an attention in bringing the technical and social aspects of this work together, and hopefully feeding them into really thinking systematically about how we save the planet, which I think is the big mission for this kind of work ultimately. So in if there's questions popping up or any comments that anybody wants to make before we close, I'll be very happy to take them now. I don't see that. Oh, Richard, please.
I think one of the big challenges that we're starting to see now is the more multidisciplinary interfaces between soil science and plant science. So a lot of our researchers now are really interested in following that whole process through, from how nutrients are added to the soil, how they're then made available in the soil to the plants, and how those nutrients are taken up and converted into good, high quality nutritional food. And I think there is a real challenge at the moment in how we describe soil in a meaningful way. And so we can describe crop traits in quite a meaningful way now, but we can't easily do that for soils. And I think that's possibly going to be a real challenge over the next few years for trying to address some of these questions. I'll be interested to know what other people think on that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. That's a very important point. And I think it also points to the fact that we are looking here at an effort which is bringing together very many very different fields of biological expertise and knowledge that range from soil science to entomology to ecology to plant pathogen interactions, and this of course is one of the big challenges that we need to solve. And not even to mention the fact that within a structure of the CGIAR, that which we heard about at the beginning of this book launch, we're also trying to integrate climate data, data that come from the socioeconomic environments where the crops are actually being cultivated. So yeah, I mean, this is really the cutting edge frontier of integration, and that involves not just, which is already a huge challenge, making sure that we have technical ways of bringing this data together, making them commensurable, standardizing the formats, but also making sure that the different research traditions that underpin this kind of research can talk to each other, which is often actually the bigger challenge, I would say, in this field. Any other comment on this or other points that anybody wants to raise?
Sabina, I'd like to raise one, because
Please.
I was reviewing the book a few days ago, just in preparation for this event, and I've noticed that it's something that is what I'm about to say is mentioned in the introduction of the book. It comes up in several chapters, but I think it probably requires further analysis. So maybe it's an idea for a new chapter in a new book. This constant, you see, tension between this idea of data information as common goods, as global public goods in the case of the international treaty. And then I think this national governance of agricultural systems, and in particular of some of the information systems that are attached to agricultural system. And this is a tension that is definitely part of the policy discourse within the plant treaty. We have found some ways again to reconcile these tensions. We haven't really projected these tensions into the field of into the global information system, but I think it's something. It's an area that probably deserves further analysis. There's so much, I think, knowledge and insights coming, I think, from this book that it probably will have to bring it together under under a new effort, maybe in the future.
Thank you very much, Daniele, for bringing this in. Yeah, indeed, this continues to be a huge sticking point. We've seen it also recently with the dialogues, not just around the treaty, but also the Convention on Biological Diversity. And of course, this comes with the additional challenge, which I think is worth mentioning, of actually having a very diverse field in terms of private and publicly funded components, where it's not always easy to reach agreements on what actually should be disclosed, to which types of data and research procedures transparency in fact applies, and which stakeholders are accountable to whom, especially when looking at this from a very international perspective, where there's so many different regimes of knowledge and ownership also at play. So yeah, thank you very much for this. I think that's the big challenge for the future, for sure, for many of us in this call and for anybody who will listen to this and have a look at the book in months to come. I guess it's time for me to now round up this discussion. I very much want to thank again my co-editor Hugh, the administrators of Egenis and of the Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, who has helped us in this effort enormously, all of the co-authors and the organizations that support them for being so patient in this exercise in interdisciplinary dialogue, and very much hoping that we can continue these discussions and build further collaborations in the future, also building on the materials on this book. So thank you very much again, and have a good weekend.